Hey folks, and welcome to this episode of the JJLP, the Josh Johnson Leadership Podcast. This second conversation with Pastor James Downing is so good, especially if you're a pastor and you're thinking about entering a sabbatical. Let's jump right in.
Thank you for joining me for this second interview. And so for our listeners who listened to the first one, and if you haven't, just to remind you that there is a part one where we talk with Pastor James here about preparing for his sabbatical. And he shared his preparation process and kind of gave us a preview of what it was going to look like. And he promised me that we would get to have a sabbatical retrospect. And so that's what we're going to have today. So I thought it'd be interesting. First of all, thank you for joining me again.
Oh, you're welcome. This is my privilege, and to be able to take a sabbatical, actually to be able to take my second sabbatical.
Yeah.
12 years since the first one, but it was very good. It was very good to be able to have that privilege. So.
And already, the first episode, I know of at least one pastor here in Grants Pass who heard that and has inspired him to begin thinking more intentionally about his own sabbatical.
Yeah, no, I've had about 3 talk to me since I've been back, and a couple more said, "Hey, I hear Josh is going to cover this, so I'll wait."
Yeah, that's great. Well, so in the first interview, you kind of introduced us to these 5 phases that you got from the navigators, and I'll link it again in the show notes if you didn't get it from the first part of this conversation. But the five phases were release and relinquish was part 1. Part 2 was rest and recovery, and then reflect and refocus, realignment and reassignment, and then reentry and reengagement. So I thought it might be a natural way to structure our conversation, just kind of comb back through the last few months and just get a sense of what worked, what didn't work, what you kind of learned, what you'd like to recommend. And in the midst of that, if there's any places we need to rabbit trail, then there's space for that. So the first one, and actually our first conversation was in the midst of this chapter, was the rest and relinquish. That was underway when we last spoke. So how did that phase go, kind of looking back on that?
Well, I look back on it, and I think we did quite well, particularly a lot better than I had, say, 12 years ago. So really walking that through with the elders, talking about everything that I do. Well, I'm going to be gone. And so the elders took this on, and 2 of our elders also are on staff. One of them was part-time and one of them was full-time. But they said, no, we will do this ministry while you're gone. We're not asking you to we're not going to bring in special speakers. We're not going to hire somebody to cover this while you're gone. So that was pretty awesome. So we talked, we prepared, we equipped them for the teaching phase that they were going to step into, because all of them teach here, but generally they're doing like communion teaching, devotionals, or a Sunday school class, and not so much regular pulpit, giving full 40-minute, 30-minute messages. So I think that went really well. I mean, you always look back and say, particularly if you're a person like myself who doesn't prepare well, that you could have prepared better,
Sure.
But you're also at the same time having to do all the regular things. So we just had finished one of our largest outreaches with Vacation Bible School during the year. So we had over 100 kids here in August, and we're leaving September 1st. And then in August, we also approved our investment in Ghana, so our mission project in Ghana. So we just took on the largest mission project that we've ever done as a church. So 3 years, $230,000 worth of investment, and then said, "Oh, by the way, we're leaving. See you in Christmas." So for us, putting all of that in place, getting it started was quite a bit of work, but it was good.
So is there anything that you would recommend or caution against for anyone kind of looking towards this phase in preparation for their own sabbatical?
I really think we did well with the idea of having a clear, okay, here's what the elders are going to do. So I was going to be gone for 12 weeks, which is a long time. Actually, 16 weeks. I think our previous one was 12, and then we had to cut it short because of an emergency. I think thinking that through with them, saying, what are you going to do with these 16 weeks, not just what am I going to do with these 16 weeks, really allowed me to be in a better place to be able to say, all right, they are going to take care of the church, not just, okay, I'm going to take a leap in the dark and believe that they will. No, they know what they are doing. So that helped for a person like myself who cares about the flock and who, wants to see it done a certain way after you've been at it for quite a while. So that was helpful for us. I think not taking the time to release and relinquish could really create the problem. So in other words, if you do your release and relinquish simultaneously with the time you walk out of the church, you're in trouble because they haven't then had time to talk about it. So we talked about, hey, they're going to be flying the plane, so I have to take my hands off the controls of the plane before I leave the plane. So when I parachuted out, so to speak, for my sabbatical, they had already been flying the plane and were able to ask me questions about, okay, what about this or what about that? So they had taken on some responsibility. So I think that was really good.
Mm-hmm. Just for clarification, the emergency that made you come back early, that was your first sabbatical, right? That didn't happen. My
first sabbatical. My father passed away right at the end of my first sabbatical. So yeah, that was a tough return. Coming back with a great deal of joy and peace. And hey, praise the Lord, we knew where he was going. He knew where he was going. He was ready to go. You're just never ready for them to go.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So nothing really comes to mind as far as, you said you're a very analytical person, a very planful person, so you can always find something that you could have done better. But I'm curious if there's anything as far as if you could go back and do something different about the way that you did it.
I think further equipping for the team. We've transitioned, and that's coming more through the reentry, but we've transitioned through those things, a number of things they have not released back to me. In other words, they took on those responsibilities. So those things are good. Thinking that through, looking as an elder board, perhaps even at our annual planning retreat or at a planning retreat saying, hey, where do we want to be? What's it going to take during the time that you're gone? Would have been helpful. I am not a great planner. I'm more a visionary. So I'm the guy who looks at the top of the hill and says, "Oh yeah, we can make this climb." I'm the guy who forgets to bring the rope or doesn't plan for the temperature or whatever it may be. So I'm not the most analytical.
That might be an interesting rabbit trail. Did you then find because when we talked about this last, there was a lot of intentionality involved. I know that some of the phases at the time you didn't know, it wasn't clear what you were going to do with them, but you were doing some very intentional planning for this sabbatical. And did that kind of go against the grain for you? Is that kind of you having to lean into a part of you that's not?
In the sense that, no, in the sense that you stepped into those phases, you knew what they were. You didn't do a whole lot of preparation for them because you can't, in essence, it's, my description of where we're going next, when we start turning into the rest and recovery, you're starting, to shut this thing down that, a lot of pastors, at least myself, run pretty hard, run pretty fast. And so to slow down and to not run at that same pace, you can't, okay, on this day I will do, you just have to stop.
You mentioned you're a visionary by nature, not necessarily a planner.
Right.
Was planning for the sabbatical an easy, natural thing to do for you, or was that something you had to be very intentional and it was actually a little bit?
No, it was more pressure for me. The idea of planning through, the idea of scheduling, the idea, you're going to schedule 16 weeks to be out of your house. And then right before we left, we realized, there was a number of projects that needed to be completed at the house that would probably be best completed with us. It could be completed with us not there. So we needed to make those investments. I didn't plan those things real well, so that added some stress. We had our house painted, we had a pad poured, we had different things done. But that's just the lack of planning from a guy who doesn't plan enough.
Yeah. Well, that might be encouraging to some other leaders out there who maybe the idea of sitting down and doing this, like scheduling and planning ahead, might be kind of a chore. It might be really difficult. It is. Well,
and it's thinking differently. It's you have to think about your church, but then you also have to think about yourself and your home. And somebody may be able to take a staycation I can't. I just the way my personality is, I also live a half mile from the church. I literally can see the church building from my front dining room window. So you are not going to be, quote unquote, away. I'm at my house. I've got 2.5 acres, 12 fruit trees, an orchard. I'm just going to go back to do the work that I have to do. So I had to be gone. So then planning, what does it take to be gone, financially, but organizationally? We didn't stay in hotels or motels. So being able to plan that and prepare, you have to send out invitations or but send out requests, not invitations, but to different pastoral rest places and things that, arrange different places where to be gone for 16 weeks is a long time to be out of your house.
Yeah.
Which my wife, that's the part that was probably hardest for her. Is just being out of her nest for 16 weeks was pretty tough.
I thought about trying to have your wife on this conversation as well, and I know you can't speak for her, but if you heard her say anything along the way as we go through this, that might be edifying to this conversation. Bring her perspective in as best you can.
Bringing them into your planning, realizing that, my wife and I, Susie and I are best friends. We are absolute polar opposites. So the idea of what you plan may not fit what your wife plans, or it may not provide the rest and renewal that she needs versus what you need. So being able to recognize you got your church, you've got your own personal home if you're owning a home, a living at home, and then you've got, okay, what does that person need? What does this person need? Those were all things that we had to walk through. I think you just don't. You're not regularly plan. At least I'm not regularly planning those things. So it was good.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's look at phase 2, rest and recovery. And I think when we talked last time, you were intending that time to be spent with family. And how did that
rest,
go?
And honestly, what we've added to that is rest, recreation, and recovery. So 12 years ago, when Navigators first introduced some of these concepts to us, or we were introduced to them, it was the idea of, plan a really good 2-week vacation that's better than your normal, that you wouldn't normally do. And ours happened to end up in Hawaii because that's where my wife wanted to go. I wouldn't have put that on the list, but that's what she put on the list, so that's where we went. It was great. It was great. It was amazing. We were there for 10 days, and it cost us $300.
All right.
Total lodging. So that was a God thing, because we weren't staying in a pastor's place. But I think that, wanting to connect with family for us, we have one son still living at home, but both of our sons live north of us, so it's a 4 to 5 hour drive. It's tough to spend time together. And for them, it's usually the weekend. Well, guess what? Preachers are usually working on the weekends. So for us, it was a lot of time of reconnecting with them. So particularly the first 4 weeks. And then even with our own family, because, okay, if somebody's going to get deprived, it isn't going to be my kids or my grandkids, so I've got this investment. Well, then it's like, okay, well, we don't take time with the siblings as much. So we spend a little more time with that. So here in Oregon, for us, that meant driving up to Portland, spending time with them. That meant taking them. We went over to Seal Rock and rented a whole house for the weekend. Stayed there with them. Had marvelous weather, and we did the same thing with a portion of Susie's family like the week before. So we've done 2 different, and it was a great time at the beach. So for us, resting was a part of that, but it also just relaxing. Just you're doing stuff with people, so it helps you in the process of transition. You're not thinking about what you're letting go of as much, because you got these other things you're pouring yourself into. And I think for the average guy, they think of taking a sabbatical means, okay, I'm going to sit and meditate and, pray and read. Well, I found it really helpful just to go out and really pour myself into people for a while. It just wasn't the same people. Mm-hmm. So for me, there was just a bit of a transition there. And then we started adding in our rest. So we took a week with family at the coast, and then took a week where we stayed in a pastoral rest place. We took a week where we stayed with family, and then we took a week where we were totally alone. So we're just transitioning slowly into this process, and everybody's different. But for us, a little bit busy just because we were driving quite a bit, but it was good. It was a good time, and just when you sleep enough, and there's not when you're not going to be asked to speak again for 16 weeks. For the guy who's spent most of my life preaching every Sunday, that's a big change. You just have this rhythm of life that you're operating on. So you're leaving that. So the rest and recovery is really, can you leave that well? Can you just relax and be okay with that? And so we were in church in different places during our sabbatical, but we were not in our own at all. We chose to watch the messages. I found watching the whole thing at times was difficult for me, because you're back to management and what did or did not happen. So it was like, that doesn't necessarily do the best for my mind. But just being able to hear these elders that we'd been equipping teach was great. So that part was sweet. So that was a part of the rest and recovery, and I think that being able to deliberately say what brings you rest, what restores your soul. So for me, I'm an outdoor person. My wife is an indoor person. So we have to plan that way. You say, okay, you're going to have to be taking your hikes in the woods, or you're going to be at the beach or whatever. And she needs to have a view, and she needs to have a warm house, so they're different. And so I think of thinking through what helps you unplug, and then what helps you worship, because that's the other thing, is you're wanting to move your focus from being on pouring out to drinking in. Probably be the way that I might reflect on sabbaticals, is a lot more of drinking in.
Were there any, I'm curious I don't know if this changed throughout the phases, but I think about even just doing a day retreat, a prayer retreat, or even just spending an hour in quiet. At some point you start to get bored. You just you hit the end of what you got, and you're like, now what? And that's the space where new things can happen, whether it's talking to God in a new way, but you're gone for 16 weeks. The things that you're used to doing in the in-between times, not only just work, but also just doing the dishes or going out to the yard, you have new rhythms that are starting to kind of form for a season. I'm curious, what did some of those things look like? Or were there things that you kept on wanting to reach for, and like, nope, that's not for me to reach for.
In the starting phase, you have to do it. It's like, okay, I'm not going to go there yet.
Yeah.
Because I need to rest before I even start to do that. So you move into the reflect and refocus, which is is more the third phase. And at that spot, you're now moving from just enjoying everybody else and resting and to more introspection, to more times of prayer, more times of reading, both scripture and other books. And then for me, and I'd really recommend it for anybody, is the journaling, doing a lot of journaling. So
when did this start? Did you have a date when you're? I am now in phase 3.
I basically followed the whole thing about 4 weeks at a shot.
Okay.
It didn't work out perfectly as far as depending on where we were staying, because all those places had to be booked as well. And with the exception of one place that we stayed for a month, everything else, we did 2 weeks at one place. Everything else was about 4 days to 7 days. So we were moving quite a bit. So that part, if a person can spend longer time in one place, I'd recommend that. I don't get bored in the sense that I will find something to do. If you ever told your dad you were bored when you were a child, you found extra labor.
Yeah.
So, and my father, spiritually speaking, obviously isn't boring. So and we put ourselves in places where, okay, you can be refreshed, you can be encouraged, there's something you can do. So for me, choosing to let go and choosing to trust him, we started this with Psalms 46 10 kind of became our theme.
Remind us of that one.
Cease striving and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. And being able to look and say, what aspects of your life are striving, what aspects are not. Because there's a difference. The Bible tells us to work hard. It tells you be diligent at what you do. Take pains with your teaching. So it's not saying don't work hard, but the why you work and what you're trying to say, those things come out of introspection. So journaling for me, and I don't know how a person could do it without, because it allows your mind, I still remember Chuck Swindoll talking about writing and journaling and saying, your mind untangles itself through your thoughts, but out your fingertips. And I've definitely found that. So I did daily, even when I'm home, I will have a gratitude journal. So I'm trying to do about at least 3 entries a day of things I notice. And it may be things I've seen before. It's not like has to be unique every day, but I mean, maybe like today, a couple of new colors of irises are now blooming in my front yard. It's great to see the black is back, or whatever. But so that's a daily journal, a gratitude journal. And then I have what I call a devotional journal, that each day I read scripture. So I read through the Bible every year. And in my process, one of those, I generally do a 4-part reading. So I've got, Old Testament history books. I've got the prophets, and I've got the Gospels, and then I've got the epistles. It's kind of how it works. And at least one of those passages is going to speak something to you. Literally write down the key verse or the key verses or the key phrases that stood out of that, and then respond back to God from that. So for me, it's a matter of saying, okay, who told me this? What is he like? So just what's God like? What's this revealing to me about God? And so that's a great centering focus of just being able to say, I'm just grounding myself on who he is, and then what has he told me to do? And so there's usually a command, almost always in Scripture is a command. And then okay, what's my response? And then maybe talking about the promise, I may be talking about my attitude. It just depends on what I'm writing. And then 4 is, okay, now what am I going to do? So I know who he is. I know what he's told me to do. I know how I've responded to that. Now what am I going to do? So those 4 things show up on a daily basis for me. So I'm daily doing a devotional journal. When I started my sabbatical, we then started a sabbatical journal, which to some people at this point they're gagging.
Did you have 3 journals then going?
Yes, I did. I've got pictures of that sitting at the table with all these things spread out across the table. But for me, being able to separate stuff where you're writing for pages of stuff that's flowing through your mind about yourself, about God, about the church, about your marriage, about your parenting, about your grandparenting, whatever. You're just you put highlight. For me, I just put highlights and notes that allow me to be able to go back and look at that or reflect on that. And at times, I'm writing stuff that's like, this might end up being writing material. This might fit into a book or something like that. I was not trying to write a book. I did about 100 pages in my sabbatical journal. So quite a bit of writing. And then I don't know how many books I read. I read, but I'm not like some of these guys that are, so many books they're trying to do a month or whatever.
So was that the reading of books? Was that during this phase, or was that kind of spread out through your?
Pretty much just this phase here, the
reflect and refocus,
the reflect and refocus phase, and then the realignment, reassignment phase. Both required reading. And
these are books that you chose ahead of time, or you kind of pick them up along the way, or just look on the bookshelf of the house that you're staying in? Well,
actually all of the above. So, I mean, you pick some classics, like for me, A.W. Tozer, the Pursuit of God, a great book to start off with in the beginning. So clear back into what we call the rest and refocus, where you're just doing a little bit of daily reading. And then some of the other stuff was requiring more work. If you're reading some people who make you really think hard to listen to their stuff, it requires more reflection. And sometimes it was just practical stuff. It's just reading about pastors going through burnout, or reading about what's it called, margins and Anyway, I can't remember. It's a classic book that's been out there, but it's just like, okay, just look at this again, because the idea of rest and margin, what we found was that both our pace and our margin in life had to change. And so when you took the time to reflect and you knew, in essence, I've pictured it kind of like taking apart an engine. Now, I'm not the mechanic, so I may horrify some people in the way I describe this, but obviously, you can't plan on restarting the engine the next day if you're going to take it apart. Mm-hmm. And with pastors, there's stuff you can't examine if tomorrow you have to use that in ministry. You're having to go after that. You're not allowed to take that apart and say, what's really going on here? Why are you living this way? Why are you thinking this way? And for me, I've been in ministry for a long time, since about 1981. Uh-huh. So being able to take apart something and say, those bearings need to be replaced. That needs to be filed down. That needs to be done differently. So you're looking at your own motives. You're looking at your own practices. You're looking at the way you've developed your relationships, both with for us with elders, with deacons, with congregation, with life groups, and just being able to, you just can't do that much reflection when you got a sermon that has to come out, you got things you're supposed to be teaching to all those groups when you're here, so you're focusing so much more on others. So for me, a lot of this was really introspection and just asking him questions so the Lord would just show me things about me. It was not always fun to see some of the things that he had to show me and go, oh man, I am a lot more selfish than I thought I was, or I'm more fearful here than I thought I was, or why are you acting like that? The controlling aspects, things that God shows you as you both, reading other stuff as well as reading scripture, all of it, blended together. And then my wife and I would take walks and talks and do things like you talk about, hey, do you do anything different? I did this once. Last time I did this one day. This time, take a complete day of silence, where nothing, where you're not speaking at all, and you're not speaking to your wife. You're not speaking out loud even to the Lord. You're just being quiet. It was very different for a slightly talkative person, like myself. But it's amazing how much conversation is still going on inside your head.
So 3 questions arise. Remind me your wife's name.
Susie.
So I'm curious what at this phase, kind of what would be an average day look like? When did you get up? What did you do first? You don't have to get super granular, but just kind of an outline of how you would spend a day and if it was rhythmic and I'm curious what she was doing, if she had her own journey through this.
She had her own journey. She had her own books. She had her own stuff. But for us, I'm trying to think, we worked really hard back to the 8, providing yourself at least 8 full hours of rest, and sometimes longer than that, 8 to 10. I'm not really a person that stays in bed once I wake up. So I'm up. So generally speaking, I tend to rise at 7. If it's a late, so on sabbatical it's 7. At home it's 5. So 5:30 or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm moving. So she operates on a different pattern than I. So hers was completely different, and you just have to schedule that. So our meals, I do start my journaling stuff and my daily devotion stuff, and we do like a breakfast, and then you're moving into, okay, I want to do some reading here. I want to do some more journaling about this. Okay, maybe we're going to do lunch, or depending on the weather, where we're at, because we were, like I said, we moved around quite a bit. We might be taking a hike. So a lot of times the afternoons, it's like, okay, I cannot sit at a desk this long, so I need to be out and hiking. So we spent a month on a place called Kamino Island. So Kamino Island is north of Seattle, and if you know where Whidbey Island is, it's up there in those places. So we spent a month there. So that's really where we did a lot of our reflective work. Right before we went there, we went to another place called Anderson Island, and that was perhaps a unique spot. It might be an interesting thing for guys to check out Standing Stone Ministries. What they do is they take pastors on retreats. I was looking at like a pastoral conference thing. You know, you just do your computer, your internet search, and these guys, but they have a pastor couple that pairs up with you that then basically caters your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You're not allowed to cook. You're not allowed to serve. They're just taking care of you. And then they're walking you through each day of the 6 days, I guess you get together, of Prepare and Enrich. So we're looking at our marriage. Your strength finders, we're looking at your personalities. What's your life map like? So looking at, what are the things that you've been through. Anyway, and it just took us through that. It was pretty busy, pretty intense for a week. They talk about being the most organized, relaxed time you've ever had. And
that's good.
That's kind of how they put it. And for me, because I'm an outdoor person. If I can't get out every day, I'm confined. Mm-hmm. So I made sure we got out each day. So on Anderson's pretty small island, and you can only access it by ferry. And during the winter time we were there, probably less than 1,000 people on the island. So it's a pretty small place. But, we met a pastoral couple there that we went to church. We were there for another week. We were there for actually 2 weeks. So 1 week with this couple, and then we stayed in the lodging that we had for another week. But that was real intense. So that kind of goes back to that question you had about coaching. Did you receive some coaching? Yeah. So during this time, there was coaching established, and we established a relationship with these folks. So we've texted, we've so 1 or 2 phone calls since then that we've had with them. So
that was my question was the rhythm of the day. What was your wife doing during the day? And then, if you had a supervisor who was kind of overseeing this, and so it sounds like at least for this segment, there was
for 1 week. There was for the most part. I think because of where I'd been 12 years before, I had some pretty strong perspectives of where I wanted to go. And I didn't establish that. A Navigators does through their ministry for their own folks. They have supervisors. I happen to be a non-denominational pastor, so there is nobody over me. So the elders and I had planned these things out ahead of time, but part of the process was me not telling them how to do work, and then them not telling me how to do rest. Yeah. So we just I gave them a couple of reports during the time that I was away, including video reports, but not interaction. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't that for me. I tend to pick up pretty strongly, and you just hear, oh, so and so's died, or this person's had to do this, or they're if they start telling you about their work, you're going back to work. So you're trying to say, no, we're letting this whole thing shut down. So like I said, we took apart the engine, looked at it, worked on these different things, and just tried to then let him begin tuning it. So for the greatest part of the time, we were working on James, and Susie, did her own pace and her own stuff. Not as focused or as, she doesn't journal quite as heavy as I do or anything like that. But she's working on her own. Were
you having to work at not taking phone calls? Was your phone ringing and you just ignore it?
I made that pretty clear before we left. And there was a few people, we won't be able to call you. And I said, you can call, you won't be able to reach me.
Yeah.
And I think when we were back in the rest stage where we were just breaking away, we had a couple calls that people tried to reach us. And you just didn't answer them. And because if they need to reach me, then they'll call the office. They call the office, and the office tells them, oh. So I had people who said, well, yeah, that's what they told me, that you're on sabbatical. And then they just run on talking in a text,
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a person you're not going to feed that. You're not going to respond to that. About the only time my office had to receive a call from me was when my cell phone said, the security code you requested for your credit card is, and I went, I haven't requested any security code. Sure. I'm not making any purchases. Okay, who's purchasing something large enough that they need to access this with me? So I texted back and forth with the office, and they were on a 3 project. They were flying the executive director out to Grants Pass, and they just had bought his plane ticket, and they had to. My name's on the card. So but that actually worked out. It was part of God's sovereign selection. We were coming home, had one of the projects that we had to supervise take place or finish at the house, and we were here for 4 days, and he was here for 5, and 3 of those overlapped. So we were able to actually spend a little time with the executive director talking about the project. Did not come to church when he was speaking here. Did not connect with anybody else during the time we were here. But it was good.
Well, let's look at phase 4, realignment and or reassignment. What did that look like? And more than that, what did that feel like?
Honestly, for me, I'm also at a phase of life where I'm getting all sorts of birthday cards right now because the national government tells everybody you're turning 65.
Okay, yes.
So the Medicare application stuff is flying in. So you're at a phase, where we were moving towards retiring a pastor and then having to look at your own eventual retirement. So that was a complete different phase of life that was coming in this time. So that was a little challenging. The neat thing about it is retirement became to be much more attractive or a greater possibility for me. And as a workaholic, as a person who says, this is what I want to do, this is the purpose that I'm invested in, that was pretty good to actually take a break and not be able to say, hey, but the Lord and I could do this. He can do this work through me. If he wants me to change my pace, I'm okay with that. And that was part of what was coming out of this whole thing anyway, we called the margin pace. Margin being that you're putting enough space that you're not running to the edge of the page, because as pastors, we always have stuff that's coming up that's going to go into your margin. So if you don't actually create more margin, you're overworking. So like for us at Jerome Prairie, we'll ask full-time staff to do 40, 45 hours a week. But what I had to go over with our associate was say, hey, that means you're not scheduling yourself for more than 40 hours a week, because you're going to have 5 hours of overlap somewhere. You're going to have stuff come up. So you plan a margin that allows yourself to live within this certain phase. It's not that number one, we can't control our lives completely, particularly in the pastorate when you're on call, but that if you begin to put more things within that margin, as opposed to, there's a tendency for us to write within. And in the pace, you start as a young man in ministry. I started, I was a lead pastor at 23, the youngest member of the congregation. So you're driving, you're wanting to achieve, so there's a lot of things that you're having to look at saying, why are you living at that pace? Trying to live at that pace now, so that's more some of the reflection stuff. I can't remember exactly where we're going with this.
No, we're just looking at realignment and reassignment, and kind of what did that look like too?
So for us, the reassignment, for navigators, they literally will move you to a different place.
Okay.
We make a commitment. We would recommend this to anybody who's going to take a sabbatical, that you say, apart from God's lightning strike, I'm not taking this. You will never candidate someplace else. You're not going someplace else for at least a year. If that happens, then you need to reimburse the church for the sabbatical that you took from them, because you didn't take it for them. You took it from them. So that's my view. Others may not agree with that, but that idea that the pastor is going to move on the moment he gets back from the sabbatical, I don't think that's a good thing. And it's oftentimes, as somebody else, a friend of mine here, Dennis Weber actually used to talk about this. Well, pastors have always found ways to take sabbaticals. It's called quit.
Sure.
And they go to another church. So they have this certain space. I haven't done that. So I did 9 years of my first church, took a year off for renewal and rest and refocus. And then for the last 32 years, have been here at Jerome Prairie. So, I take vacations and I take my days off. I'm a firm believer in you should take at least one day off. I think most people need to take two. One day off is your Sabbath. It's the idea of saying, hey, I'm going to rest. And then the other day is there's all this stuff that needs to be done at your house or, your normal life. So by taking a day that's actual just to rest has really helped me with my pace. That's something that came out of my last sabbatical. Yeah. I came back with a better pace than not been a great guy with the margin, so that's been interesting. The coming back, three things that my gifting and my
are we moving into the next phase?
No, just still talking about that.
That's okay.
Realignment.
Okay.
A reassignment and saying, okay, I'm an exhorter. I don't just teach. I can't teach without telling you why you should be doing this or why you need to be involved in this. I don't give you this information. I give you an exhortation about how to do it, and then evangelism is a part of that, and then equipping. So those are my 3 E's that I came back saying, hey, this really needs to be a greater spot of my focus. I'm coming back intending to continue my labors here, unless God directs me elsewhere. I haven't sensed that He's doing that, and that was our direction there. So I didn't come away from there going, okay, you need to quit pastoring, or you need to stop doing this or start doing that. There's a few that it is more the margin stuff than it was, and some focus stuff is saying, hey, you're spending X number of hours with what I call needy people, and if you're not investing at least that equal amount of time in teachable people, in training people, you're not doing well. So you're pouring into people that are, they're always going to be there. That the needs are there. There's always going to be people that Jesus had to heal, people Jesus had to feed, Jesus had to do all. But He was investing in His 12 disciples. So am I investing in my men? And so that's one of the things I came back with, is just needing to invest a larger portion of my time in my men. So each day I'm looking at that, measuring that, saying, hey, are you doing that? So for reassignment, that's kind of come back saying, no, I think the Scripture's already given that to me. I just think the culture and the practice can take you away from that.
That's good. Yeah. I didn't think about that reassignment, at least in the navigator's context, could be a literal going somewhere else. I just assumed for you or for a pastor going through that phase, it would be just a checking in on how are you spending your time? What are your goals for how you spend your time? And are you running in the lane that God's called you in, or have you had some mission drift, and you either got to say, okay, I accept that mission drift, or got to refocus,
Right.
And so that's good. I imagine that the personality inventory and the prepare and enrich and some of those things from the earlier phases probably kind of helped clarify, just remind you of who is James? What is God calling James to do? And
right.
Are you doing that?
Well, yeah, and I think, like I said, I think that's a good portion of the examination, because it's not that you don't do that. Like for me, in my daily devotional time, it's do you then have time to think about it? Because the next thing you got to do is, hey, there's a sermon coming every 5 days, and so you're back at it. So you don't have time to then the next, I haven't at least at times taken the time to really expand and work on something for a longer period of time. And most of the issues that we're wrestling with in life don't get solved in a day. So there's a process that we're going through. So some of that is in there. And so, and we didn't, marriage, I think we talked about that a little bit there. My wife and I assessed our investment with our grandkids. What are we doing there? And then we both have very elderly parents. So she has a dad who's 93 and a mother who's 90 now with serious Alzheimer's. So what level of investment are they going to need right now? In all likelihood, we're saying goodbye to them probably in the next 2 to 5 years. My mother's 92. So, so there's some of those. So there was, how do we put them in my mind, and it's maybe twisted in some people, put them in the flock, so to speak, say, oh, I'm scheduling time for them because they're a part of my family. This is, I've never been able to do this separate categories or separate boxes real well, but but so we've spent some more time with them. So my mother comes in and lives with us more than she has, and that's better for my sister, and that's better for my mother, and I'm trusting eventually that'll be better for me. So
yeah,
it's continuing to shape my heart. It is at times challenging.
Yeah,
you're
starting to look at coming back, because I'm guessing the fifth phase, the reentry, is actually you back at work,
right?
Correct. So I'm just kind of curious, as you're mindful of this day is coming. I mean, what are you thinking? You've been away for so long, and
I forget how to preach.
Right? Yeah. Were you thinking that? I mean, was that a?
Yeah, because you've done this for 50 years, it's not really a threat, but it is a weird thing to have not done it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there was much that way. I scheduled it specifically the way we did our sabbatical. I don't necessarily recommend it, but that's the way we did it, and it works for us. But I scheduled myself to be back here on Christmas. So, but we had talked as elders. We had also already talked about reentry. What's that going to look like? How will that be managed?
Before you left?
Before I left.
Okay.
We talked about when I come back, you're not coming back to the same. We're not going to live that way. We as a church aren't going to live that way. As eldership, we're not going to live that way. So that there needed to be a report to them about what are those things that I have sensed and seen. And then, but reality is what reality is. So you came back, okay, I'm here a week before Christmas. The guy who's supposed to preach comes down sick the day before Christmas Eve. Okay, you're scheduled to do something. We're scheduled to have a Christmas Eve service. In a perfect world, okay, well, one of the elders is going to step up and do that. When you're not in a perfect world, a pastor who's used to doing these kind of things just steps up and does that. Mm-hmm. But he was also then going to be the worship leader for Christmas Day. So then you're finding a worship leader in 24 hours to fill. So you reentry becomes reality real quick.
Yes.
And it certainly did for us. I actually led worship with my daughter-in-law. She does worship great, but she wouldn't do it without me. So
yeah.
So that was a cool thing, and it was awesome. As her kids who don't normally see her lead is a side, but you just let the Lord lead. But they sat there and they're 7 and 5, and they go, "Mom, you worshipped amazingly, beautiful voice." It was just, and they sat there, just took this whole thing in, watching Papa and their mom do worship. So, okay, I wouldn't not want to do that. I've had that experience. I don't want to lead Christmas worship again necessarily. I want to see the gifts of the body, function. So people get really twisted ideas when the preacher does all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So just because
you came back, there was a need, you were able to fill it. You kind of jumped in.
You do what you got to do,
yeah.
And yet, there's, and 2 of the elders have at this year resigned, so they're both life schedules. So instead of having 5 guys who are sharing this load, you have 3. So that changed, and of course, then Ernie has retired. So
he's one of your associates.
He's one of my associate pastors and one of the elders.
Yes.
So he'll continue to elder, but we're trying to give him a couple months of just no responsibility so he can figure out after 50 years of ministry what it's like to do nothing, because he's never done a sabbatical. So reentry has been challenging. It's been good. The course that I have set for myself at about 6 months in here, we're in May. So yeah, we're just 5.5 months we've been back. And as I told you, I didn't want to do this interview right after I came back, because I'm going to tell you what I've heard versus what I'm doing, what I'm practicing. And I'm being pushed on some of those things. My wife had to bring it up to me and say, "Hey, a couple of the margin things started to being pushed, but we've trying to get 2 mission teams out the door plus a retirement guy, and those are logical things that you explain in your mind, but that's exactly what pastors do all the time. So you're always making excuses for why you're writing over your margins. So it's good to have accountability both from the elders and from my wife that speak to those issues. They're more attentive. The elders they respect. Holy smokes, is a lot of work to preach a message. And some of those guys clearly have the gift and others do not. So some of them won't be employed in that spot necessarily again regularly, but others are like, hey, you need to be a part of a rotation. So Jared and I share quite a bit of preaching rotation that way. So I think I've come back. I've worked at a better pace. I'm continuing to hold that. I feel like that's been pressed probably the last four weeks or so.
Are we going to, like, if I was looking at you the last 5 weeks, is that different pace more in what your schedule looks like, or is it more in how James comes to work? Is it more like an inner
I think it's both.
Attitude?
I think it's both. I mean, the idea that when you're running too far, you're I used to be a runner, and you run and you're short of breath because you've ran too far. You fatigued yourself. You, generally speaking, in the pastorate, you can't restore that without taking time away. So for me to not, hey, you don't run so far. You don't stay up so late. You don't. So those hours are different. The James that I'm bringing to work is different in the sense that I don't have to make it happen. I think to cease striving and know that I'm God is stop striving, James. I definitely took that message away, which is, okay, I'm the one who's building my church, not you. So do the work that I've called you to do, but don't try and do my job. Mm-hmm. The throne is occupied. Hallelujah. So, and I think I had to address the fear factor for me of what if the church, at 65, what if it doesn't become what you always thought this would happen? We as a church have been up and down size-wise, ministry-wise, staff-wise. So seeing different things going on is like, can you be okay with what God is doing with his church? So Psalms 41:10, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not anxiously look about you, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Surely I will help you. Surely I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Having spent this much time with him, I think I'm coming from a better reservoir of saying, my Father's got this. He'll be okay. He will work this out. He knows. And I've always theologically known that. I've always practically known that, but I haven't always practically practiced that. Mm-hmm. And when you really move into this spot, you can be placed with a spot of trust that's different. I mean, it's not so much related to my sabbatical, but it shows the difference. I was tested recently because I was supposed to be applying for Medicare, and I called them up and say, oh, you filed a 4361 exemption back in 1982. You don't have Social Security. You don't have Medicare. But they disallowed it back then, and I've been paying thousands of dollars to the federal government since then. So you just went from a spot of, oh, okay, you're planning on retiring to you have no retirement. It was a very interesting thing. Several times through the day, we went, I wonder what the Father's going to do about this. So for the next couple of weeks, as we waited for the paperwork to come through and for us to be able to have something to talk to them, they're saying, hey, we have this paperwork. So we said, well, send us your paperwork so we can look at it together. And but a tremendous amount of peace. I mean, I can't say there's no tension when you just realize, okay, $3,000 of retirement just disappeared per month. That's sobering. But I think that the time with God continued to increase my confidence in him. And so it's like, no, I don't know how he'll work this out. I don't know what is going to come of this, but he'll work this out. And the form came through, and they disallowed us, which is why I've been paying all these years, which is why I'm fully qualified. And the guy was able to call me back and say, hey, I've never seen this happen. I'm not sure why it did, but you clearly were disallowed. You're not allowed. So no, you're fully covered. Yeah. But having spent enough time with my father to say, my Father's got this. Yeah. I don't know how. I mean, I'm not putting my kid quite on an altar, but sure. But it's one of those kind of experiences where you say, okay, no, the God's got this. And so, Jared left on Monday for 3 weeks for the Philippines, and Ernie leaves this afternoon for Australia. And all of a sudden you go, okay, I got 3 elders that are continuing to serve with me. And these guys okay, and we had something come up this week that's taking a little extra time and a little more shepherding care is needed. And hey, I'll be there. Just call me. So that's neat to see, reentry, the real world's still here, and what a pastor is required to do or is asked to do in this culture is still pressing. But our team has changed. I think they see what I do and they appreciate what I do better. I think that's come out of the sabbatical. I think they carry a greater portion of the load. So every Sunday morning, they're carrying a greater portion of the load than they have in the past. So we're not operating the same way. So that'll be interesting to see how it, continues to work out as we walk this through. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah. So we got through those 5 phases there. Thank you for those reflections. I think it's safe to say that you're now an expert on sabbaticals, both as a thinker and a practitioner.
Drip under pressure. That's what I heard what experts were.
Expert. So I'm just curious, with the listener in mind, especially those out there who are thinking towards their own sabbaticals, take a moment for big picture reflections and takeaways. Anything that you feel like hasn't really been touched on or covered? Or
he's worth it, and you're worth it. He's worth you giving that much reflection time to, and you're worth taking that time to reflect. If I were to say, do it, that's the exhorter in me. You should take a sabbatical if you've done 7 years or more in ministry, that you've fully invested yourself. You need that. Plan it. Don't just plan on taking a vacation. The intentionality really makes it much more productive for me. So being able to say, this is what I'm trying to do, this is what I'm wanting to walk through with the Lord was good for me. I think milk it. You're really working that schedule to have those things. The family time is better. This is better. Working through that whole schedule, and then you have to come back and practice it. You can walk back in, and it's like I said, the very first weekend you're back in ministry, it's like I almost felt like, okay, did I fail by stepping up and taking that role, or did I, who knows? But I shared some stories. But I mean, it's just that spot of are you willing to trust the Lord as He works through people other than you to shepherd that flock? That's I think for a lot of pastors, at least for me, that's a part of it. You never say, I'm doing this and God's not, but He's using you and the hours that you're putting in and the conversations that you're having with people. So you say, in the sabbatical like I took, which is 16 weeks, you're saying for 16 weeks you're not going to talk to those people. We had a man come to Christ, I think in July, meth addict. Am I going to see that guy when I come back in 16 weeks? Are the guys going to rally around him and they're going to be, it was great to come back to my men's group and have that guy there and see him growing and prospering and seeing different people doing well that let it wasn't right or fair or it was scary, whatever they want to put it, that they would be gone. Elders had to perform memorial services while I was gone. Which is fine. Weddings had to be performed while I was gone. People tried to schedule those things, and I'm not going to be here. So I think on the big view, once again, I say it's an excellent thing to do. I just think because of the way we tend to, if you're living life with a perfect pattern and you have a perfect sense of rest and recreation and refreshment, maybe you don't need a sabbatical, but I find an awful lot of us run at a different pace, and an awful lot of people then, in essence, are burning themselves out or putting out more than they're taking in. And, I was told a long time ago, if your output exceeds your input, your upkeep becomes your downfall. Mm-hmm. And so continuing to monitor that and every 10 years being able to say, hey, where's that at? Am I at a healthy place? Because I think there's a tendency for us to minimize our weakness. There's a tendency for us to minimize our fatigue. And when you take enough time to pull aside and you pull yourself out of it, both they, the church, and you have to do some reflection and say, hey, I mean, if you're at a crisis point, this might be a great thing for you, but it might be very difficult for you because you're at a crisis point and you've got a bunch of stuff you're going to have to work on. So, it's not a vacation. A vacation experience happened in some of those things that we did, but this is more a rebuilding and a refocusing of our hearts and our minds to what, how far does he want us to run? And I don't know. I'm expecting to run till 70, and probably be releasing lead here in a couple of years. Is our plan here with our eldership, but I, if they're not pushing me around in a wheelchair and I'm not drooling, then I'm probably still going to be preaching. So that's kind of how we're at.
Yeah. That was kind of one of the last questions here. Was right now it's the spring of 2023. Just kind of curious what's on the horizon, anything you're excited about or challenges you're anticipating. You reflected on it a couple of years. You see this potential transition. You have a sense of how kind of around 70s you'd like to keep being in active ministry. I'm curious, like more on the more immediate horizon. What kind of things are you looking at this year?
We've launched our Ghana 3 project, so the translation process has begun there in Ghana. So that's kind of cool. So there's 3 tribes who are now working in the first 3 books of the Old, or they're each working on Genesis as they do their translation. So that's a big thing for us. I think missions will continue to be a large thing for Jerome Prairie. So if people want, this is what he's called us to do and commissioned us to be a part of through his scripture, that will always be, the world impact is there. Wanting to look at our local impact stronger, I don't have particular things there other than our life groups, but seeing how equipping men ahead of time take on responsibility and utilizing somebody else in a teamwork approach. So Jared did an awesome job with me in this thing. The guys were doing stuff for Jared that they wouldn't do for me, or I didn't ask them the right way.
Sure.
One of our elders called it being voluntold. I love that term. I was like, one of my favorite words. You're voluntold.
Yeah.
And looking at that equipping, even this week, where someone made a request for a reference, and I thought, they need to be equipped before I give them a reference. Oh, they need to be equipped, but what about these other 6 guys, or what about these other 8 guys? Can we take this next step to equip? So that's back to what a surprise! That's one of my three E's.
Yeah.
So back to equipping, saying, okay, so if I can stay focused on those things, I think that will give me a sense of pace, and then also just to work within my margins. That's kind of where we're at. We're blessed. We're really blessed. To me, I think it's a tremendous privilege to be a minister of the gospel. I think it's a tremendous privilege just to be saved. So, that's glory right there, and that he involves me in that process with other people is glorious. So, wanting to continue that is really where we're at. I don't have, I see us investing heavier into international missions, even more so than we are.
Well, if there are any people from Jerome Prairie listening to this, first of all, I want to thank you for blessing your pastor to go on sabbatical. And Brother James, I'm glad for you that you take the time to share your process through this and give some reflections back to us. And it's just, we always benefit from hearing each other's stories, especially a little bit diving deeper. We don't always have the chance to, especially your other colleagues in town, working at other churches. They don't always have the chance to come into your office to get the full story, so this gives an opportunity for them to learn from what the Lord has taught you. And thank you for making that available to us in this format. And I think that's the end of any questions I forgot to ask you?
No, I think that's good. I just think that idea of asking those questions, and planning, it really is something to do, but it is something to plan. I don't have to be the person you plan it with. I'm willing to help other guys with this, and the outline I think that the navigators came up with was real productive for me, both times, but more so even this last time, because I think there's a larger teamwork behind it. So I think that don't take a sabbatical apart from your church, take a sabbatical with your church. So they're a part of this process as you prepare for it. They're a part of this process when you return. They're doing their part in this whole thing. I think we all grow from that. Yeah. So I think this church has grown stronger because of it.
I'm curious if you can provide me with at some point, just reflect on those books that were impactful, and just a few, that titles that do come to mind, as well as get a list of any spaces that you think pastors should look at if they're looking to.
Oh, I can definitely give a list. Yeah, we can give a list of pastoral
and I'll put
rest places. And
I'll put that in the show notes here for folks if they want to refer to that and just be reminded of some local spaces that they might consider.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is don't be afraid to tell your congregation in the process you're leading up to it, hey, we're going to be booking some places away. So some of you know of places or things that I do the same. I mean, I let people donate things to me, and so we stayed in a very, they called it a cabin. We would call it a lodge.
Sure.
It had 5 bedrooms. So I don't call that a cabin. That's bigger than my house. Quite a bit bigger than my house. But that was purely through the grace that somebody else in the congregation just said, hey, you might check this out, or you might check this out.
That's a good word. As you're preparing your congregation for the sabbatical, talk about that, and maybe the Lord wants to provide something to resource that sabbatical that comes from somebody knowing somebody in your congregation.
Yeah, we've seen that both times, that people, we literally had a couple here the week we were starting our sabbatical, and just name and phone number who were visiting somebody in their congregation, said, come stay at our place. And we're like, we don't even know these people, and they said, come stay. And we had a great visit with them. Yeah. So it was wonderful. We've experienced some terrific rest, and that has been good. There's a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of opportunity throughout the U.S. So we pretty much stayed in the Pacific Northwest. In fact, we did stay in the Pacific Northwest this whole time. So we went Oregon, Washington, and then off border to our island stuff. But it was good.
Wasn't that good? What an honor to get to pick James's brain before and after his sabbatical. And I hope that listening through this has helped jumpstart your thinking and stir your imagination for what good rhythms of rest could look like for you.